Ireland has a great history of promising action on climate change, but a sorry record on delivery. The latest EPA statistics on our emissions prove that fact once again. Even Ireland's Commissioner Phil Hogan has been blunt in his warning that this country will face hefty fines from the Commission unless radical action is taken. What we should do, what we will do. I'll be talking about that with our panel after this report from Paul Cunningham.
At the beginning of the year, and in the very public setting of the European Parliament, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar put his hands up on the question of tackling climate change. Ireland declared had failed.
But as far as I'm concerned, we are a laggard. I'm not proud of Ireland's performance on climate change. We need to do a lot more. And one of the things my government will do in the next few months is publish our 10-year investment plan, our capital investment plan for Ireland over the next 10 years. And central to that will be the kind of things that we want to do around climate change to make sure we meet those targets in 2030. And there's lots of things that we intend to do so that we can meet.
It was a notable admission on emissions by an Irish leader, frankness for once replacing excuses. The failure wasn't Fine Gael's alone. This is a failure which stretches back decades.
It's 20 years ago this week that Ireland first signed up for targets to limit our greenhouse gas emissions. And the latest EPA figures are an indictment of 20 years of government inaction. They show that our emissions are still rising, and in fact in 10 years' time they'll still be higher than they were 20 years ago. So there's been a lot of inaction, and now it's time to change that. Leinster House is being refurbished these days. Ireland's climate policy certainly needs to be overhauled too. But is there the political will to do just that?
When the Citizens' Assembly produced radical proposals to change Ireland's abortion laws, one minister told the Irish Times there was no chance they would pass the party, Dáil Éireann or the people. But the referendum results proved that it was the members of the Assembly who were in tune with the public mood, rather than the politicians.
And when the 100 members of the Citizens' Assembly were asked how the state should tackle climate change, their answer was a clarion call for politicians to deliver. 80% voted in favour of green taxes, which increased year on year. 96% wanted the government to move swiftly on electric cars and tax existing fossil fuels. 89% wanted taxes on carbon-intensive farming with rewards for those who don't. 97% wanted the state to end all subsidies on peat extraction.
So again, they've shown that the citizens are ahead of the politicians, as we've seen on other issues that have gone through the Citizens' Assembly process. So now the citizens, the political system, has to take the report on climate change as seriously as it took the Assembly's report on the 8th Amendment.
The person charged with the mammoth task of trying to steer the Irish ship off the climate rocks is Minister Denis Naughton, a man who promised big.
A lot of work needs to be done. We need to start working together. We've already started that process within the department.
However, one of the minister's main ideas, his national mitigation plan, was criticised even by the state's Climate Change Advisory Council.
The national mitigation plan that was published last year, to be honest, there wasn't very much in it. It was a very disappointing document, and the Climate Change Advisory Council in their report were very critical of the document. But one thing it did suggest was that government was going to look at a carbon tax with a view to doing something in the upcoming budget. So I'm not sure exactly where that discussion is at.
With the latest EPA statistics showing Ireland will miss its EU 2020 targets, it's been a bruising ministerial tenure.
Denis Naughton has been unable to make a dent in terms of climate change and emissions figure. And as evidence from the latest figures from the EPA, we're required to reduce emissions by 20% compared to 2005 levels, yet it looks like we will only reduce it by 1%. So we are abjectly failing in terms of climate change emissions.
However, as referenced in the European Parliament, Leo Varadkar has pointed to the government's National Development Plan, Ireland 2040, as a clear signal that things are going to change. Emissions problems from transport and housing are going to be targeted in particular.
It was very welcome in the National Development Plan that there's a commitment to retrofit 45,000 houses a year to a B2 level. That's a deep retrofit. Those are the kind of things that we can do. Those are the kind of things that a carbon tax would also help us do.
Yet those who've tracked climate policies for many a year remain sceptical.
I remember a decade ago, governments promising to insulate 1 million homes, and it never happened. And now Denis Naughton is promising that it's going to happen at a rate of 45,000 every year after 2021. To do that, you need a lot of moolah, you need a lot of money, and until we see that, the greenbacks, the money, the financing, I would be very sceptical that even that target will be met.
Ireland has refused to act on its climate change promises. Now, hundreds of millions of euro will have to be shelled out in fines rather than being spent on much-needed flood defences. Failure comes at a price.
Paul